in February 1840 at Waitangi did not cede their sovereignty to Britain.
Well, good evening, you beautiful New Zealanders. Tonight we're in for another great video. We're in our series called The Treaty for Dummies. Don't be offended by that title. There's a lot of people who say, look, we're real dummies, we don't know, and they're just kind of laughing it off. We don't know anything, can you help us? So if you're offended by that, then call it The Treaty for Newbies. I'm still in Article 1 of the treaty, and we're into now Part 6, because there's so much in Article 1 of the treaty, it's unbelievable. Did Maori cede sovereignty or not? That's the big question. And of course, all around New Zealand right now, that's the hot topic. Did Maori cede sovereignty? Most Maori say no, they did not cede sovereignty, and a lot of other people say, oh, you definitely did cede sovereignty. I'm one of those who said, no, you definitely ceded sovereignty. And so both sides have to prove their point. They have to produce proofs and validations and say, how do we know? And so far, the people who say Maori did not cede sovereignty have come up with no proofs. They only have opinions and they only have speculations. And so we've got to be the ones who provide the proofs and prove our point. Okay, so in the Article 1, Parts 1 to 5 videos, I've done 5 videos so far on Article 1 because there's so much in this article. And it's all about sovereignty. So I discussed, and by the way, if you haven't seen Parts 1 to 5, I'd say go and see them because they're all sequential and they're hierarchical, which means that the information in video 1 is important and you won't get as much out of video 2 if you haven't seen video 1. You know what I mean? So watch all the videos and you'll get a heck of a lot out of this. I discussed in these videos so far what it would mean for New Zealand if Maori did not cede sovereignty, and what it would mean for New Zealand if Maori did cede sovereignty. And of course, a lot of people can talk about sovereignty or not sovereignty, or did they cede it or did they not cede it, but they don't actually know what it means to cede sovereignty. So it's crucial that we actually understand what sovereignty is all about. Our Prime Minister, Chris Luxon, says that Maori ceded sovereignty, but he doesn't know what that means, obviously, because he's not treating all citizens in this country equally. He gave Maori $800 million in the last budget. So it's go back and find out what ceding sovereignty actually means. I also discussed the term the reversalist. A reversalist is someone who wants to reverse the decision made by the chiefs in 1840 to cede sovereignty to the British. These reversalists today say Maori did not cede sovereignty in 1840. They are reversing the decision that was made by their elders in 1840. They never produce proof or evidence to verify their claim. I talked about that. They only use opinion and speculation, which is pretty telling. Okay, so then I said there were 9 proofs that Maori ceded sovereignty. Well, what are those 9 proofs? Well, here they are. There's the existence of the treaty, and I won't go over what that means. And then number 2, there's the speeches of the chiefs. And number 3, the Kohimarama Conference in 1860. Then there's the documented evidence from records inside the British Parliament. And then there's the headstone of Tamati Wakanene. And then there's the opinion of Sir Ranganatira, New Zealand's greatest Maori, who said Maori ceded sovereignty. And then there's the eyewitness accounts of settlers who lived among them. Now we're going to deal with that one, number 7, in this video, but there's 2 more. Plaque at the treaty grounds in Waitangi, and perhaps the biggest one of all is the 1852 Constitution. So I'm going to talk about those in the next few videos. Alright, so we're now talking about the 7th proof that Maori ceded sovereignty. The 7th proof that Maori ceded sovereignty in 1840, the eyewitness accounts of settlers who were at the Waitangi signing and who lived among Maori after the signing provide another powerful proof that Maori ceded sovereignty. So eyewitnesses are very, very powerful because they were there on the day, and if anybody can tell what happened and tell us what happened, it's them. Not people like today's Maori activists who are living 184 years after the event telling us what happened. I know who I'd believe. Well, one of those people is this guy called Samuel Warren. There was many settlers who wrote diaries. They didn't have computers, they didn't have tablets and cell phones, and they didn't have dictation devices, and what they kept was diaries, actually physically writing out diaries of their experiences. And of course these are hugely important to us in history because they give us a true picture of what really happened. So one such eyewitness was the Reverend Samuel Warren, writing in 1863, an eyewitness to the treaty signing at Waitangi, February the 6th, 1840. He said, quote, I was present at the great meeting at Waitangi. By the way, it was a great meeting. Believe it or not, there was 1,000 people on the lawn at Waitangi when the celebrated treaty was signed, and also a meeting which took place subsequently on the same subject at Hokianga. Notice he calls it a celebrated treaty. It wasn't one where everybody was upset and angry, but it was a celebrated treaty celebrated by everybody. There was a great deal of talk by the natives, principally on the subject of securing their proprietary right to the land and their personal liberty. Everything else were only too happy to yield to the Queen, as they said repeatedly, because they knew they could be saved from the rule of other nations by setting sitting under the shadow of the Queen of England. He goes on, in my hearing they frequently remark, quote, let us be one people. We had the gospel from England, let us have the law from England. My impression at the time was that the natives, that's Maori, perfectly understood that by signing the treaty they became British subjects. And though I lived among them for more than 15 years after the event, and often conversed with them on the subject, noticed often, not just once in a blue moon, I never saw the slightest reason to change my opinion. The natives were, at the time, in mortal fear of the French, and justly thought they had done a pretty good stroke of business when they placed the British lion between themselves and the French eagle. And there's the reference. So I'm just going to break this down and go through the key points of this eyewitness account. He starts off by saying, I was present at the great meeting at Waitangi when the celebrated treaty was signed. Like I've said, nothing is more powerful than an eyewitness, someone who was actually at the event. Then he goes on and says, and also at a meeting which took place subsequently on the same subject at Hokianga. Now Hokianga is just a little bit north of Waitangi. Reverend Warren must have gone with the treaty signature gathering team as it travelled around Northland for him to have said that. Then he says there was a great deal of talk by the natives, principally on the subject of securing their proprietary right to the land. This means Maori could legally own their land. Their land was going to be secure. Another tribe could not steal it from them. That was one of the results of the treaty. And also their personal liberty. What does that mean? Maori no longer needed to live in great fear of another tribe pouring over the hill, coming to steal their possessions and their family or take them as slaves for labor or for food. That is cannibalism. Signing the treaty brought peace and protection for Maori. The subject of Maori and their land in relation to the treaty is hugely important. We dare not just gloss over this aspect of Samuel Warren's eyewitness account, so let's dive into it. Well, this guy is one of the most accomplished historians in New Zealand, and I'll tell you who he is in a minute. The Maori understanding of ownership of land in the period 1800 to 1840 is worthy of note. Eminent New Zealand historian and former professor of history at Otago University, G.S. Parsonson above, contends that Maori in the early contact period did not own land. Maori did not have any concept of owning land or that land was even valuable to them. So watch what he says. This is a quote. In the early contact period, the hapu were still hunter-gatherers. That's how he describes Maori. And by the early contact period, he means sort of early 1800s. That is, they lived on birds, rats, shellfish, and fish and fern root. That's what they ate. That was the diet of Maori, pretty much. What they laid claim to or owned was birds, trees, rat runs. They ate rats and rat roads, pa tuna or eel weirs. They were eating eels and specific fern root patches. The saltwater hapu similarly claimed specific shellfish beds and specific shellfish spots where they knew they could catch snapper, hapuka, etc. It follows that they did not own land as such as farmers owned land. They did not measure it, divide it up, fence it, farm it year after year, pass it on to their children and their children's children. They had no need to do so, which perhaps explains why they were so ready to sell their land to anyone who asked for it. In the last resort, land only became of value in the eyes of Maori when it could be sold to the Crown for resale to Wakefield's colonists. And there's the reference from that great quote from Professor Parsonson. Even as late as 1831, Maori confessed that they were people who owned nothing. Did you get that? We recall the Yate Rewa letter of 1831 and signed by 13 northern chiefs, which says we are people without possessions. Look at that. When you compare that with the Maori activists saying they owned all of New Zealand and we need to give it all back, well, that just totally flies in the face of this letter in 1831 that the chiefs wrote to King William, where they said, we don't have anything, we don't have any possession. And there's the reference. Professor Parsonson's words are wise words, you know that? Maori people had no concept that land was valuable until settlers came along and offered money for it. That's what he was saying. So let's fast forward to 1840 and the treaty. By this time, Maori had well and truly worked out that land valuable. You could sell land which gave you money, and that money could buy you things like guns and gunpowder and like clothes and iron and implements and nails and pots and pans. It was a magic what the British brought into New Zealand for Maori. Via the treaty, Maori were told that the land they lived on, the land owned by their tribe, would be secure. It was the same with the chattels on that land. One of the first things the British did was survey the land and issue titles. So when the British came here, they worked out in consultation with Maori which tribe owned what land. They put out boundary pegs and they surveyed it just like we have today. In this way, Maori were able to buy and sell land quote, the British way, which was having it surveyed and having titles issued, proper boundaries on each property. Maori went on to sell 92% of their land. We never hear about this today, only that Maori land was stolen. It was not stolen, as the activists say. Maori sold it. The line that it was all stolen is just pure BS. And in the description of this video, I'm going to give you a paper or provide a paper which explains how we come to the 92% figure of Maori selling 92% of their land, because we need to know how we got that figure and what are the facts. Okay, Radical Maori today also talk a lot about Tino Rangatiratanga. You heard that bandied around, this little phrase that they use. What does this mean? Well, the answer is Maori, they call it Maori self-determination, sovereignty, autonomy, self-government, domination, rule, power, control, highest chieftainship. They use lots of different phrases and terms and words like that to explain what Tino Rangatiratanga means. So what does all that mean? Well, Maori are in charge of their land and resources and aspirations. Maori acting with authority and independence over their own affairs. These are their own definitions of what Tino Rangatiratanga means, by the way. Tino Rangatiratanga is a practice. Maori living according to tikanga, that's Maori law, belief, superstitions, and customs. Well, how should we reply to all of that? Well, when you think about it, all Kiwis have Tino Rangatiratanga over their land and property, don't we? Think about it. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who legally own their 800-metre square section and house and contents, are the chiefs of that property. You think about it. Go back to the Maori definition up there. They own that land and those resources. They have aspirations for it. They can act with authority and independence over their own affairs on that land. Nobody tells them how to live on that land. They can live how they like. So every New Zealander really has Tino Rangatiratanga over their land. Sure, if Mr. and Mrs. Smith want to build something on that property or develop the land in some way, they have to work with the local council, don't they? That's true, yeah. They also have to pay rates. So Mr. and Mrs. Smith have Tino Rangatiratanga over their land and property, just like Maori do. So there's nothing special about Tino Rangatiratanga. It applies to everybody and all the 160 cultures who live in this country, so it's not unique to Maori. What am I saying? Call for Maori activists today for Tino Rangatiratanga over their land and possessions is not unique to Maori, as I just said. They have this in common with all New Zealanders, so what's the big deal? Maori can only be the chiefs of the land and property they own. That's what I'm saying. In this way, all Kiwis are chiefs of their land and property. This is what the treaty promised, nothing else. All calls by Radical Maori for some special status over the resources of New Zealand must be firmly rejected because they're not in the treaty. These calls are a breach of the treaty in actual fact. These calls by Maori activists are actually dishonouring to the chiefs who signed the treaty in 1840. You know how you see Maori protesting and they always have signs up saying honour the treaty? Well, you know what? They don't even know what the treaty says. And they don't know how their own behaviour is actually trashing the treaty and dishonouring the treaty. If the Maori in Samuel Warren's world could hear that what Maori activists today say about the treaty, they would shake their heads in disbelief and shame. Today's Maori activists would be embarrassing for the Maori in Samuel Warren's day. Finally, when activists today say Maori have the right to rule and reign in New Zealand, for this was guaranteed in the treaty, how should we answer? No, it was not guaranteed in the treaty. There is nothing in the treaty about this. So what is it? It's treason. What Maori are doing today, the activists, demanding their own government, a parallel government, setting it up, it's treason. And the government should be onto this and treating it like treason, and so should the media. They're not. When Maori ceded sovereignty in 1840, they gave up all rights to govern New Zealand. This is what ceding sovereignty meant. The way they could have a say back then was through voting in democratic elections. Now, Maori were not given the vote till 1867 because the rules back then were that if you didn't own land, you could not vote. But it was the same for settlers. It was the same for whether you, it doesn't matter the colour of your skin back then, if you did not own land, you could not vote. But Maori were given the vote in 1867, 11 years before other people could vote in the same way. So, you know what? Maori had the advantage way back then. They could vote in 1867 even though they did not own land, individual titles to land. And that was ahead of Europeans in the same situation. So they were getting advantage way back in 1867. It's the same today. This is what equal citizenship means. It means everybody gets to vote in democratic elections. This is what Maori signed up to in the treaty. Then Samuel Warren goes on, in my hearing they frequently remark, let us be one people. We had the gospel from England, let us have the law from England. What's that all about? Well, Maori wanted to join in with all things British. Why did they want the law? Well, Maori were lawless. They were constantly at war, indulging in cannibalism, slavery, and infanticide. You know what? They were just tired of failing. They were imploding as a culture and needed help. They were tired of living at the bottom of the barrel. That is the truth of New Zealand in 1840. Then Samuel Warren goes on to say, my impression at the time was that the natives perfectly understood that by signing the treaty, they became British subjects. What's that saying? Well, it's saying it was impossible for the British to have granted Maori British citizenship unless Maori had ceded sovereignty. And that's a fact. You cannot become a British citizen and not cede sovereignty. They would never have done that. It was impossible. So this is one reason we know when Maori celebrated British citizenship and being British citizens, they must have ceded sovereignty. There's no other way of thinking about it. And though I lived among them for more than 15 years after the event, says Samuel Warren, he's saying 15 years is a long time to really get to know people and what they think, isn't it? I would have thought it was. And then he says, and often converse with them on the subject. What's that saying? Well, Maori in our early history were excited and grateful to have ceded sovereignty and become British citizens. You know what? What a contrast to Maoris today who demand compensation for the evils done to them by colonization. No Maori today, when he or she thinks or looks deeply into their own heart, can say that colonization has been evil, which is what they say. When radical Maori today complain and protest, they are acting. You know what? These activists, they're fantastic actors. Why are they acting aggrieved and mortally wounded? Why are they making up lies about how bad colonization was? Well, the answer is they are only doing it to get money and power. They have worked out that if you complain, it pays big dividends. What it's about. Samuel Warren goes on to say, I never saw the slightest reason to change my opinion. What's he saying? There was no dissenting voices among Maori in our early history. The only voices Samuel Warren heard were the voices of Maori who were grateful that their chiefs had ceded sovereignty and that they had become British subjects. That's the truth. Then Samuel goes on to say that the natives were at the time in mortal fear of the French and justly thought that they had done a pretty good stroke of business when they placed the British lion between themselves and the French eagle. What's he saying? The threat of the French coming and taking over New Zealand, wiping Maori out, just shooting and killing them, was a real and ever-present reality to Maori in 1840. Maori in Samuel Warren's day were ever so grateful that the British had offered to protect them. They were relishing the fact. They were people with real honor and dignity. Such a contrast, you know what, with today's Maori activists who are, let's just get it out there, they're liars, they're deceivers, they're actors, they're bullies, intimidators, and they're BS peddlers. That's all they do. All to get what? Cash, assets, and power, not mandated in the treaty. So there you go. That's enough for this video. But it just shows you that the eyewitness accounts of settlers reinforces all the other proofs that we have, synchronizes nicely with all the other proofs we had that Maori ceded sovereignty. So just to finish, I've written out a table which contrasts the eyewitnesses in 1840 with the activists today in 2024. Let's just see the difference between these two groups. So in the first column we have the eyewitnesses in 1840. In the second column we have Maori activists today. The eyewitnesses in 1840, they tell us what actually happened. The Maori activists today, they tell us what they imagine happened. That's all they can do because they were not there. The eyewitnesses in 1840 tell us Maori celebrated ceding sovereignty. The activists today tell us that Maori did not cede sovereignty. Come on. The eyewitnesses in 1840 tell us Maori were thrilled to be British citizens. The Maori activists today complain about the evils of becoming British citizens. They're totally contrasting and different. The eyewitnesses in 1840 tell us that Maori were grateful to have British protection. Maori activists today tell us that Maori were powerful and united and could easily have protected themselves. Yeah, right. Eyewitnesses in 1840 tell us that Maori society was imploding. Maori activists today tell us that New Zealand in 1840 was the Shangri-La of the South Pacific. Eyewitnesses in 1840 tell us of 15 years living among Maori and not one mention of any land being stolen at all. 15 years is a long time, but Maori activists today tell us nothing but land being stolen. So really, who would you choose to believe here? Someone alive at the time writing with no political agenda? Or would you choose to believe somebody living 184 years after the events with strong political agendas who were not at the events? Well, you know the answer. Come on. These guys are just talking spin. The eyewitnesses tell the truth, and that's the truth. Thanks for listening. Please share this video. Please like it. Please comment, and please don't forget to keep getting cards out around New Zealand. It's going so well. You guys, I'm so proud of you and so thankful that we're all in this together, and we're working as a team to stop co-governance, stop the Maorification of our country, and to stop the treaty fraud. All right, have a great night.